So tonight, we're taking a break from our usual programming, and I want to present to you a lesson on becoming a godly father, what it means to be a godly father, what it means to be a Christian man. This is a version of a presentation that I did at a men's retreat in Florida last year. It's about 50% of what I did. I kind of mixed it up a little bit. After looking at it today, I realize I have probably enough in here for 3 classes, and so I'm going to resist my normal urge to go extremely fast and plow through it and be rushed, and I'm just going to go at the normal pace, and I welcome your comments, and next time I sub for Wayne, I'll do part 2, and then the next time I'll do part 3, so this will be spread out over however many weeks or months. But I got to thinking this afternoon, I became a father at the age of 26 when Jason was born. And those first 26 years of my life, I could probably count on one hand the number of sermons or Bible classes on how to be a godly father. Y'all's experience may be different, but where I grew up, the churches I was at, we didn't seem to talk about that a lot. I think the idea was that you learn how to be a godly father by trial and error, by maybe learning from your father, the good and the bad, but there wasn't a lot of instruction on it, and so tonight my goal is to give some instruction on it, to give some thoughts on it. There are some caveats, though, that I want to mention before I get into it. The first caveat is that it is not all-inclusive. Okay, this isn't designed to be everything you need to know about being a godly father or a godly man. These are just some lessons that I have learned over 2 decades of raising 2 sons. The second caveat is that I often failed. Okay, I'm not up here as a subject matter expert who got it all right, and I'm telling you how to do it. My family was and remains a work in progress. As am I, as a guy trying to be a godly man, and as a guy trying to be a godly father. I have made many mistakes, and I suspect the fathers in the audience would say the same. So what I'm talking about tonight is some ideals or some principles or some things that we can shoot for, but we want to recognize that we all fall short. And then the third caveat is that this is not science. There are no guarantees here. Your children will eventually have to make up their own minds about matters of faith, right? They're going to have to decide for themselves. I have worked with a lot of youth groups in my life in different places as I traveled around the world with the Air Force, and I have seen faithful children, very faithful children, come out of unfaithful families. Okay, mom and dad didn't go to church. The kid somehow met somebody, started going to youth group, and that kid ended up being very, very faithful. I've also seen very faithful parents produce children who eventually fell away. Some of them fell away in high school. Okay, some of them fell away later, but their faith never stuck. And yes, there are biblical principles about if you teach your children the way of the Lord, they won't depart from it. And I believe that verse, and I believe that verse is generally true. It happens a lot of the time, but it is not absolute. And I know it's not absolute because I have seen it too many times where it didn't happen. Just to give you a quick example of that before we even get into the material, if you want to jump over to Deuteronomy chapter 21, Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 18, we'll start in verse 18. It says, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of the city, 'This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear.'" Now, of course, this is the Old Testament. This is the old law. But if you notice there in the first part of what we read, This stubborn, rebellious son, it says, will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother. So they're speaking to him. They're instructing him. They have a voice in this. And then it says, and though they discipline him, he will not listen to them. So this is a set of apparently faithful parents who are instructing, teaching, disciplining, and their son still doesn't listen. He is rebellious, he goes bad, and so they talk about what you are to do with him. If you want another, maybe a little bit more abstract example, think of the children of Israel. The children of Israel in the Old Testament, who was their father, so to speak? God. Okay? God was their father. God created them. God disciplined them. God gave them instruction. God walked with them. He encouraged them. He did a lot of things for them, and yet they were often rebellious. And this was God. This was God the Father, okay? And yet sometimes they were rebellious. And why were they rebellious? Because they didn't listen to him. Because they allowed other influence to get into their lives. He would tell them not to intermarry, and they would intermarry. So they disobeyed his instruction, and that got him into a world of mess. But he was God, okay? So I say that to say you can be an awesome Christian parent. You can go all in, do everything you can, pray for your kids, teach your kids, and there's a chance they're still not going to end up faithful long term. You can also not be a Christian man or woman, and you can have kids that turn out pretty well going to church. And I've known of people that became boys that became preachers who didn't grow up in faithful homes. Okay, so that's a few caveats. The other thing I would say is that this lesson, while it is kind of targeted for fathers, for men that desire to be Christian men or Christian fathers, it would also be applicable for our young men who are not yet fathers, okay, who may be fathers someday. So this is for you. I want you guys to think about what I'm going to share, with the idea being that someday I might be a father and I might be able to use some of this stuff. But it's not just for you. It's also for the moms out there and the grandmas who might be involved in raising Christian boys or influencing Christian boys or influencing young Christian men, or perhaps someday you will do that, okay? What do we know about Timothy and his father? Was he a Christian? No. He was Greek. Timothy probably grew up in homes where there were idols, okay? So he didn't have a Christian father, so who stepped in and filled the gap? His mother and his grandmother, okay? Eunice and Lois. They taught him, they influenced him, and he grows up to be Timothy of the New Testament, okay? The influence of a Christian mother or a Christian grandmother cannot be overstated, okay? So whether you're a guy here tonight, a man trying to do this Christian man thing, whether you're a young man who's trying to become that someday, whether you're a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, whatever you might be, I think the things we're going to talk about might be useful, and I think there's something in here for everyone. And I do welcome your comments. I would also encourage you as we go through this, for the couples in here, if your man, okay, your man or your significant other does something right here, like if you listen to what I'm going to share with you and you go, Brian, man, he does that really well, tell him that, Valerie. Encourage him, okay? That would mean a lot to your man, to know that you heard this lesson and he's doing something right, okay? Because us men don't get a lot of positive feedback sometimes. And you men, I'm not going to tell the women to tell you what you did wrong, or what you could improve upon. But I would say to you men, if you have the guts, go home and ask your wife, of the things he talked about, what would you say is something that maybe I could work on a little bit? Because we can always work on something. We can always do a little better. So the way we're going to grow as men and become more effective fathers and husbands and Christian men is to kind of know what we need to work on, what we could do better at. So, have the guts to ask your wife, what'd you think? What could I do it? And obviously do it in a loving way. don't spend like the next 2 hours, well, pretty much everything you didn't do well, but so mostly do positive, but if you want to throw in a couple things they could work on, that's good. Okay, so let's look at Psalm 127. This is a good place to start. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sheep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate. So right off the bat, the psalmist says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Okay? So God designed the family. It was all his idea. Okay? And he created the family. And as such, he has the right, he has the authority to tell us how the family ought to operate, how it ought to run, how it ought to be structured, okay? We want homes that are built by God and that honor God and that are centered on God completely. From our habits to the goals that we make to how we parent, to how we view our children, it all comes back to God. It's all centered on God. And I have known a lot of men in my life. Okay, I'm old enough now to have a little bit of perspective on this. I've known a lot of men, some from my Air Force years, some from before, some from after, some who are a little younger than me, some who are a little older than me. But I've known a lot of men who have had great success in business. They've made a lot of money, and they have given their children many nice things, okay? And yet, their homes were not built by the Lord, okay? Their homes were not built by the Lord, and thus the homes that they built, I would call them a house of cards. It's a mirage, okay? It's a mirage. They consider themselves great successes, but ultimately their labor is in vain. They aren't godly fathers. Their children don't know the Lord. So they may be successful in the business world. They may be successful in the eyes of the world. Look at how much money they have. Look at how impressive their homes and their yachts and all that are. But they're not impressive in the Father's eyes. Because unless the Lord builds the house, it's built in vain. Okay, so the stuff we're talking about tonight, the reason I'm even talking about it is because it's so important. It's so important that parents, and I'm specifically talking to men, that the homes we build are built with God at the center, okay? Unless the Lord builds the house, it's in vain. So the construct I'm going to use tonight and whenever I come back again is a book that I read several years ago called The 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart. Highly recommend this book, written by a guy named Stu Weber. He published it in 1999. And it kind of presents a structured way of looking at Christian manhood. It's a way of looking at different aspects of what it means to be a Christian man. And it was a home run for me. It came at a time when Jason and Kyle were 6 and 7. So Janet and I were right in the heart of parenting. I mean, you always are, but when they're 6 and 7, that's just really important years. And it just spoke to me in a powerful way. I was able to read it and apply it in real time because I had young boys in the house. So it presents this construct, you might call it the 4 pillars. These are the 4 elements of Christian manhood: king, warrior, mentor, and friend. 4 pillars, and just like you might have a house with 4 pillars, you need all 4 of them. You can't just have 2 or 1 or 3 because the house is going to lean, it's not going to be stable. So you want to have all 4 of these pillars to have a house that the Lord builds. And so again, as we go through these, a little bit of self-evaluation time. If you want to share, you can share, but at least internally think about how am I doing with each of these pillars. And you wives, again, encourage your husbands, tell them, give them an attaboy for the things they're doing well. And if they ask you, what can I work on? then share maybe one or two things that they can work on. And again, if you're a mom or you're a grandma and you're influencing or you're raising a young child, or you're a grandfather to a teen or whatever it might be, think about how am I helping these young men to develop these traits. Okay. All right. So let's get to the first pillar. The first pillar is the king pillar, and the idea here is a man of vision and character. And I appreciate. Kevin's not here tonight, but I appreciate him posing for this picture for me. So if we go back to the Garden of Eden, God made Adam first, of course, and when he made Adam first, he made him the head of his family. He made him the spiritual head of his family. How'd Adam do? He failed, okay? He dropped the ball. Eve sinned first. She took the fruit. But when God, after they sinned, who did God come after? The man. He came after the man, and the reason he came after the man is he was expecting the man and was calling on the man to be the spiritual head of his family and to lead his family, and he didn't do that. And because he didn't do that, together they sinned, and there have been disastrous consequences for mankind. It was disaster for them. They got kicked out of the garden. Death entered the world. Our relationship with God for the rest of history was fundamentally changed, all because of that sin, and that sin was all because the man failed to be a man. He failed to be the king, the leader, the man of character in his home. So, every home needs a leader. And let me give you guys a little hint, you men that are here. That's you. That's you. Okay, I'm talking to you tonight. I'm talking to myself. You need to be the spiritual head, the leader of your family. That's how God designed it. Unless the Lord builds the house. Well, he designed the house, and he designed it with men as the leader. Okay? So that's you. A question comes up often, or I guess you could put it this way. In most contexts, someone is in charge. In most situations in life, someone is in charge. If you talk about the home, if you talk about the classroom, the church, if you talk about a football team, whatever it is, someone is typically in charge, or should be. So I spent 23 years in the Air Force, and during my 23 years in the Air Force, I believe I went to 10,000 meetings, okay? We had meetings in the Air Force to talk about what we were going to do at the next meeting. And then we had meetings after the meeting to talk about what happened at the last meeting and to plan the next meeting. Lots of meetings. And the further I advanced in my career, the higher up in rank I got, the more the meetings happened. But at a military meeting, you'll have a lot of people around the table. And whatever the subject is, there will be a lot of debate, a lot of opinions. It'll be somewhat chaotic because everyone's kind of talking over each other. And it could be a little confusing as everyone's trying to get their 2 cents in. And then something very magical happens a little bit later in the meeting. The commander speaks, okay? The commander. And you know he's the commander because he has the highest rank, and he's typically at the head of the table. Whether it's a table for 6 or a table for 60, the commander, it's usually a general officer, is going to be at the head of the table. And when the general officer speaks, after hearing all of his underlings pontificate, when the general officer speaks, we suddenly have clarity. We suddenly know, oh, so this is what we're going to do, okay? Thank you for the 10,000 opinions, but we now have the leader has spoken. He's listened, hopefully, gotten input, but the leader leading suddenly takes a chaotic environment, a chaotic room, and he brings it into focus, okay? And that's what a leader does in any situation, is what a leader should do. So 2,000 years ago, a meeting occurred with Jesus, who you might call the commander, the king of the universe. In Luke 9, this debate breaks out about which of his soldiers is going to be the greatest. And a couple of them even got their mom to lobby on their behalf in Matthew 20. So it's this big discussion. Who's going to be the greatest? Is it me? Is it you? Which must have just broken Jesus' heart. I mean, he's trying to get him to focus on spiritual things and all of that. And, after all this time together, all of this ministry, and you're focused on who's going to be the greatest. But then the king clarified things. Okay, the king spoke, just like those Air Force generals clarified things. And the king said this, it's up on the screen. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So kingship, leadership, headship, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, is about servant leadership. Okay? And this is the way that Stu Weber puts it in his book. He says, it's not bossing, it's serving. It's not demanding, it's caring. It's not strutting, it's stooping. It's not leisure, it's labor. It's not a golden parachute, it's a cross. A leader is a servant. A king in the home is a servant to that home. He's not strutting around demanding submission and berating his subordinates, so to speak, but he is a servant leader. That's what a king's all about. Thoughtful, loving, selfless, yes. As the king leader in your home, you got to be thoughtful, loving, and selfless, but in charge, leading, organizing, taking responsibility. Otherwise, there's chaos and disorder. Okay? And I could give you so many examples of this. I'll give you a couple. We have church leadership, and our church leadership are our elders, and that is a God-designed thing. Imagine without elders the chaos that potentially could erupt. Okay? And I'll just take COVID as an example. I think we're far enough past the heart of that to where Andy's not going to start twitching back there. But our elders only had about 50 decisions to make about COVID. Are we going to meet? Are we not going to meet? If we meet, are we going to wear masks? Or are we not going to wear masks? If we're going to wear masks, do you wear them the whole time? Or you just wear them when you sit down? Are we going to pass the communion trays? Are we going to pass the, there's like a zillion decisions they had to make. Imagine we don't have leaders and all 150 of us decide to do what we want to do. Chaos. Half the people don't know what to do, what to wear, where to sit. How are we going to do this? Our elders come together and they decide it and they lead. That's the king pillar. And we have clarity. Now, you may not agree. Sometimes you won't. But you know what's going on. You have order, okay? From the chaos, you have order. Imagine a football team with no leader. They take the field, and the coach is like, do whatever you want to do. On first down, whatever you're feeling. Brian, you're the quarterback. If you want to hand it off, hand it off. You want to throw it, throw it. Receivers, do what you want to do. Okay? Now, we have a leader. We have a game plan. The leader puts together the game plan, communicates it, and chaos becomes order. Okay? So you got to have it in the church. You got to have it on the football team. You got to have it in the military meetings, and you got to have it in your home. There's got to be order. There's got to be a leader, a king. All right? So let's talk about some do's and don'ts of this godly king. And I believe the do's are you men's responsibility. They're my responsibility. Your wife has a role. Your wife can help with this. I hope your wife does help you with this. But God came looking for Adam. Okay? So you got to make sure this happens. If your wife helps you, awesome. If she doesn't help you, you still got to do it. Okay? So these are the do's. Serve and sacrifice for the family's good. Just got to do that. Point the family to Christ. Okay? And I think of Noah. Noah didn't convert all of his neighbors. Okay? I'm not sure he converted any of his neighbors. But what did Noah do? He got his family in the boat. Okay? He kept his family focused on God, and he got his family in the boat before the rain started. So guys, you got to get your family in the boat. Okay? Before you go to your neighbors, before you go to Honduras, before you go anywhere else, okay, to the prisons, wherever you might want to evangelize, you got to get your family in the boat. One way to do that, one way to point your family to Christ is to set some faith-based goals each year. And I hope you're doing that. Maybe your family's going to get more involved. Maybe you're going to start sending cards to the sick. I don't know what it is. For the Winningers, Brian decided we're going to go on a mission trip this year. Good on them. Okay, not the whole family. They got a big family. They're going to do it in parts and pieces. But that was a goal that Brian and Valerie set for their family to get to Honduras. That is the king pillar, Brian pointing his family to Christ. Okay, and that's what we're talking about. A few weeks ago, Eddie got up here, beginning of the year, and he shared the elders' spiritual goals for us for the year. You guys remember that? So he spent a few minutes and went through, I don't know how many, there were 8 or 10 goals or something. This is what the elders want us to focus on this year spiritually. Okay? That is the king pillar at work. That is leadership at work. The leaders of this congregation setting the tone, setting the pace, communicating that. And the question for you men is, have you done that in your homes? Have you done that for your families? Are you pointing your families to Christ? Take initiative in disciplining children, okay? Don't be the guy that makes mom do all that. You know, you're at work all day. I've worked hard all day. I don't, you know, I'm not going to come home and spank the kids or get on to them. That's your job. You know, don't be that way. You got to, you know, mom has a role. Mom's going to be involved in this, okay? But you take the initiative. You make sure that happens. Provide for your family, okay? I work with a lot of young people. In fact, I've spent the last 4 days, counting today, at Knoxville Christian teaching Bible. And occasionally we will talk about providing for your family. And what I tell the young people is, make good grades so you can go to college, for some of them, so you can get a good job, so you can make money, so you can provide for your family, okay? Or make good grades so that you can get into tech school, even if you're not going to go to college or whatever. But you make good grades now because I want you providing for your family later. And they'll say something like, well, I don't like math. I don't like math. I don't care. I don't care if you like math. I don't care if you like history. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. In high school and in junior high, I made good grades on subjects I didn't like. I didn't start this semester going, well, do I like this? Before I decide if I'm going to study, do I like it? Is it interesting? Didn't matter. It was the book in front of me. It was the class I had, and it was going to show up on a report card, so I was going to learn it. Why was I going to learn it? Because I wanted to go to college. Why did I go to college? Because I wanted to go in the Air Force as an officer. Why did I want to do that? One of the reasons, I wanted to defend our nation. I also wanted to provide for my family. So you got to link up your kids with provision later on in life. You make grades so you can provide for your family, among other reasons. Make sure your wife and children prosper mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. That's a mouthful. That's a big old bullet right there. But that's on you, okay? You got to do that not just for your kids, but for your wife. So those are some do's. Let's talk about some don'ts. Emotional abuse. How would that look? What would emotional abuse be? And I want somebody to answer who's not being abused emotionally. What's that? Okay, verbal abuse. I would consider belittling, demeaning, putting down. That all fits in there. Obviously, physical abuse. You don't lay your hand on your wife except in love, and I don't care what the circumstances are. You never, ever do that, okay? So we don't want to have any physical abuse. Verbal abuse, the way you talk to them, the way you say, not just what you say, but how you say it. Sexual abuse, which can take the form of withholding or forcing. Okay, this ought to be sexual activity ought to be something that you work out together mutually. Bible has lots to say on it, but you shouldn't use it as a weapon, one direction or the other. Okay? How about this one? Spiritual abuse. How would spiritual abuse work? Anybody ever seen that? Not in your own families. I don't want to hear about that. But has anyone ever seen that in the church? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they basically tell their wives that it's either God or me.
Okay.
You love God more than me, that don't work for me.
Right. So it can be an ultimatum by a non-Christian. That can happen. Here's the other thing that can happen. I'm the head of the family because God said so I can treat you any way I want. And then we go to emotional abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse. So you lord it over them. God has given me the role as the leader, so I can just do whatever I want. Okay? That's using the Bible out of context and wrongly. That God tells us to love our wives, to care for our wives, to lead them, to lead our families, but to love them. So we don't want to use spiritual abuse. If you lean too far left, you can become a tyrant. Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, I would say, is an example of leaning too far left. He got a lot of power. He's the king and the leader and the dictator of Russia. But we don't want to be a tyrant. The goal isn't for our children to fear us, okay? Talking to the men now especially. The goal is for our children to respect us. Who do we want them to fear? God, okay? Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We want them to respect us, husband and wife. We want them to fear God. What happens when your kids fear you but not God? Yeah. As soon as they're out of the house, you can scare them into behaving. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, or probably next time. You can scare them into behaving. You can be a tyrant, and they will fear you, and they will go to church with you, and they will, if the family's bowing the heads for prayer, they're going to bow their heads because they're scared to death of you. But they don't fear God, they fear you. And when they leave the home and they finally get out from under your tyrannical leadership, they are going to leave the faith, okay? Because they never feared God, they only feared you, and they couldn't wait to get out from under your rule. So you don't want to lean left. You also don't want to lean right. And I would call this being a passive wimp. You constantly defer to your wife for decisions, for all of those things on the left. Ask your mother. I just provide. I just bring home the check. You got to take care of these kids. Okay? So you're disengaged and you put it all on the wife and you say, I just make the money around here. Okay? So that's the king pillar. That's pillar number one. Any thoughts on that before we move on? Any thoughts from some of you, anybody, but I'm especially interested in hearing from maybe the fathers in here who have given this thing a go, things that have worked for you or not worked, or any wives that want to share, other than Janet, how their husband has done this well. We'll keep it positive. Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay.
And then enforce them.
Establish rules and enforce them. Okay.
When the kids are little, they be picking up their toys or helping with little chores, and then they get curfews and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But you need to establish those rules and make sure they know what they are.
Okay. Absolutely. The king pillar, working with the queen, but you got to establish rules in your family and you got to enforce them. We're going to hit that again in pillar 3, which the rate I'm going, that'll be a year from now, but that's okay. But yes, absolutely. You got to establish rules and enforce them. Anything else before we move on to the next pillar? Yes, sir. Okay. Neglect. Okay. Absolutely right. He said neglect is a form of abuse, and it should be under don'ts, and I agree. Neglecting them financially, emotionally, you kind of check out, you're not providing for them, that's neglect, and that's a problem. That's definitely a don't. Yes, sir.
This may show my age a little bit, but you remember the commercial that was on TV where the boy was washing the car and everything, and they sit down by the tree, and the man pulls out a cigarette, puts it in his mouth,
Okay.
and the boy looks at him, and you immediately know what the commercial's trying to get across to you.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the do's that I would think about is lead by example.
Okay. Yeah. Lead by example. You tell your kids don't smoke, and then what do they see you do? Pull out the cigarette, and they're like, what's going on here? What's the message this guy's sending? So lead by example. All right. Let's move on to pillar number 2. Pillar number 2 is warrior, a man of strength and power. So the idea here is you want to be your family's protector, a courageous warrior. Men, you are to remain on call 24/7. You are never off duty as the warrior in your family. And we have this passage here from Romans where Paul alludes to the dangers of not remaining on call. He says, "Besides this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to wake from your sleep. For salvation is nearer to us than when we first believed. The night is far from gone, the day is at hand, so then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light." Now this verse applies to all Christians. All Christians. None of us need to slumber. None of us need to be asleep. But I'm talking to the men tonight, and I'm saying you got to be on call 24/7. 24/7. You are the warrior in your family. Families without warriors are going to be more susceptible to Satan. And I would, again, go back to the Garden of Eden. Adam should have been a warrior. He should have been on guard. He should have been alert. He should have subdued the earth like God told him to. And as soon as the serpent appeared and started talking about eating of the forbidden fruit, he should have taken a boulder and dropped it on the serpent's head and killed it. Because that's what warriors do when something is threatening their family, especially something spiritual that is threatening their family. Instead, he wasn't present. He didn't take charge. He wasn't a warrior, and it was a disaster as a result, not just for their family, but for all families. So you got to be a warrior. You got to be on guard 24/7. You got to be what Stu Weber calls the man of the in-between. The man of the in-between, and there's a couple of examples of that. The idea here is you think of David protecting the sheep from predators. He stands between them and what might harm them. He becomes the man of the in-between. He fills that gap. Later on, he goes between the people and Goliath. He courageously steps forward. He steps into the gap, the vacuum, the leadership vacuum in that situation. He steps in there and he's like, "No, we're not having it today, Goliath." And he goes into warrior mode, okay, and defeats the giant, okay? He's the man of the in-between. Jesus stood between Satan and us. Jesus was the man of the in-between. He was the gap filler. There's a hole there. We got a problem. We got sin. Wages of sin is death. We need somebody to do something. We need a warrior, a spiritual warrior. Jesus comes to the rescue and dies on a cross, and he is the man of the in-between. That's the role that he had. So the question for you guys tonight is, will you stand between your family and those who would harm them? Whatever form that harm might take, are you going to be the man of the in-between and stand up to Satan? So let's talk about the warrior's qualities. The first quality is you got to be have an assertive, aggressive spirit. You got to be willing to inject yourself into situations where necessary. You got to be willing. You got to have the courage, fellas, to get involved and do something. Okay? So if Jason goes to Walmart tonight and he's shopping at Walmart and he's in the back of the Walmart and he sees a child being abused. I don't mean a child getting fussed at. I mean a child is clearly being abused, physically, sexually, whatever it might be. Jason should not say, "What a shame. That is just awful, the way people are these days." And then he goes and gets his milk and bread and he exits the store. Not my problem. No, it is your problem. You're a Christian man, okay? You're a warrior. So you do something, okay? And depending on how, whether you're packing or how big you are or how, you may want to do something yourself. I would probably, well, if I was with Greg, I'd probably get involved. And between me and Greg, we would probably subdue this guy with me watching and Greg doing the work. Or maybe you're going to get store security. I don't know, but you're going to do something if you're a warrior, okay? Let's take you closer to home. You're back in the foyer after church, and you see one of our young men talking inappropriately to a teenage girl or sassing his mother. Guys, you got to say something. I don't care if it's your kid or not. You got to say something. You are a warrior. You got to step up. Pull that young man aside, and if it's my son, more power to you. You know, they're grown now, so it might be a little awkward. But when they were younger, I welcomed other Christian men calling out my sons. Now, you do it respectfully. You don't embarrass them in front of all their peers, usually. You pull them aside, you talk to them privately, but you talk to them. Okay, we are all in this thing together. So if someone's smart and mouthing their mother, especially if their dad's not around. Now, if their dad's around, you may want to go to their dad and say, hey, I heard Johnny say this, just wanted you to be aware, and let dad handle it. Somebody's got to handle it, okay? So you got to be willing to say and do the hard things. Secondly, you need to have a vision of stability, justice, order, and security. Like Abraham, Moses, Joseph, and others, our Christian influence should go beyond our immediate families, and it should be felt in the community, the workplace, throughout the church. The people in your orbit, the people that are around you, ought to know what you stand for, and that you're a warrior, and that you care about those things listed there, okay? They ought to know what you stand for. You need to not be afraid of pain and death, okay? You got to be willing to sacrifice. You are a warrior. It's not just something the military does when they take an oath and they go to Afghanistan or Iraq. It's something a Christian man should do in the context of his family. I will die for my family if that's what it takes. If I got to jump in front of that bullet, I will do that. You're out to destroy evil in all its many forms. Paul in 2 Corinthians 10, he says, for though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. We take every thought captive. If there's a thought floating out around there in your home or wherever, a thought that is against Christ and against God's word, that ought to bother us. And depending on the context, we ought to do something, say something, get involved. We take every thought captive. And our weapons of warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We got to be in the business of destroying strongholds that go against God and his word. And then lastly, for this one, we got to always be protecting and defending. As warriors, we are always on call. We can never take a day off, an hour off, a week off. We have always got to be on call, okay? So we got through 2 pillars tonight. Before we leave this one, though, any thoughts on the warrior pillar, this idea? Any ladies other than Janet, where have you seen this in your homes? We got a couple minutes. So anybody seen this in their home or have an example of this, or anybody? Yes?
One thing I would say is, I get what you're saying, not being afraid of pain and death, but anytime pain and death are on the table, there's going to be fear. I can promise you that, but it's pushing past and doing what you got to do.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be an absence of fear, it's being able to do what you got to do.
That's right.
Knowing what you're going to do prior to, you don't need to go into a situation that potentially happens and try to figure out what to do.
Right.
That's why you have the moral compass and things
Sure.
already established in your head before you.
Yeah. Curtis said it's not the absence of fear, You still have the fear. It's the courage to act even when you have the fear, okay? So as warriors, I'm not saying any of this stuff's easy. It's hard, but you got to do it. You got to step up and overcome that fear. Okay, next time I'm in here, whenever that is, we will go to the third pillar, okay, which is mentor. And we'll talk about being a mentor and how you do that as a Christian man. Thank you all for your comments and participation.